Why did no one speak her name? The briefing room was crowded, humming with muted tension, but when she stepped in, the sound seemed to dull. The low murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs against concrete, the static crackle of the projector, everything dimmed around her presence. Men glanced at her, then looked away, as though she were a ghost brushing past their shoulders. The screens glowed with maps and red lines, words hanging like sharp edges. Hostiles, grid, possible casualties. She stood at the edge of the table, silent. Her hands, calloused from too many hours on steel grips, tightened around the folder she carried. Her mission order, her last chance. No one offered her a seat. She didn't expect one. The colonel droned on, voice heavy with fatigue, eyes drawn to the men he knew by rank and record. She was not supposed to be here. Not anymore. Not after the last operation. Her file had been quietly buried, her name redacted, her presence erased. And yet she was here, and that carried its own shadow. She let the words wash over her. Insertions, angles, fallback lines. To anyone else it was data. To her every line was weight, every margin read with memory. They thought she was invisible. Maybe they wanted her to be. That was fine, because she hadn't come back to be seen. She'd come back to end something that had been left unfinished. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Her fingers brushed the corner of the folder. A single photo inside, folded, worn at the edges. A boy with his head tilted, a smile that reached his eyes. Her brother. Gone, not to war, but because of it. The way the world had broken him long before it ever saw her. She carried that picture like a weapon. The colonel's words cut through her memory. We'll insert under storm cover. One chance. Extraction won't wait. A storm. Her eyes flickered. A quiet shiver ran down her spine. They hadn't noticed. No one ever did. Because storms weren't just weather to her. They were memory. She had learned to fly inside them, learned to shoot through their silence, learned to disappear into their noise. The colonel wrapped up the briefing. The men rose, chairs grinding against the floor. Papers shuffled, boots dragged. Nobody looked at her. She slipped out the side door, unmarked, as if she had never entered. And maybe that was better. Because outside the air was heavy. The storm was already crawling over the horizon, pressing the world flat with its weight. She closed her eyes and let the wind press against her face. The mission wasn't tomorrow. It wasn't next week. It was now. And she, whether they acknowledged her or not, was the one they needed inside it. The hangar smelled of oil and old metal, sharp and familiar. She walked past the rows of aircraft, each one humming with readiness. Men checked straps, tightened belts, adjusted helmets. She moved among them unseen. "Ma'am," a young mechanic said, almost startled when he recognized her. "Didn't know you were on this one." She didn't answer right away, just watched him fumble with the straps of a pack too heavy for his thin frame. She thought of how young he looked, how young they all looked until they didn't anymore. "You'll know," she said finally, her voice low. "When the time comes, you'll know who's really here." He blinked as if he didn't understand, but maybe he would someday. She kept walking. Inside the aircraft, the air was colder. She slid into her seat, helmet resting against her knee. The others filed in, their eyes passing over her. A few frowned. One muttered something under his breath. She ignored them. Instead, she looked at the straps on her rifle case, pulled one tighter, checked the lock. Her fingers brushed the metal as if it were alive. The pilot's voice broke through. "Wheels up in 5. Engines roared, the floor shook. The storm was closer now, a low growl spreading across the sky. She let herself breathe once, just once, then the mask returned. And in the silence between those breaths, memories pushed through. Her brother's laughter. The night she last saw him, the argument, the door slamming. How he'd left and never come back. How she'd sworn she'd never waste her second chances again. She opened her eyes. The storm filled the horizon. The aircraft lifted. Inside the cabin, voices rose and fell. Men joked nervously, some too loud, some too quiet. She watched them. She saw the way one man tapped his helmet 3 times before strapping it down. Superstition. Fear disguised as ritual. Another tucked a photo into his vest pocket, a girl with sunlit hair. He touched it once quickly, like a prayer. They all carried something. She carried silence. The storm hit them fast. Lightning flashed not far. The aircraft shuddered, metal groaning. Voices stiffened into silence. She leaned back, let her head rest against the vibrating wall. The sound of the storm outside was deafening, yet to her it was familiar, almost comforting. And in that noise, she let herself think what she couldn't say aloud. If I don't return, let them never know my name, but let them remember what I did. The aircraft dove lower, cutting into the black mouth of the storm. Someone cursed, someone prayed. She closed her eyes. The first time she'd ever been inside a storm, she was 16. A training flight, nothing more. The sky had turned, the instructor had panicked, and she had felt something she'd never told anyone about: calm. As the rain hammered the fuselage and the lightning split the horizon, she'd looked out the small round window and thought, this is where I belong. And years later, after the war had taken everything else from her, she still carried that certainty. Storms didn't frighten her. They steadied her. Because storms didn't care about names, ranks, reputations. They stripped everything down to survival. Just like war. The aircraft lurched, a scream of metal. Someone shouted over the roar, "Hold on." She gripped the strap above her, body loose but ready. Her breath slowed. Around her, men clutched at whatever they could. Panic eyes, tight jaws. She stayed still. The storm battered them harder. Sheets of rain slammed the windows. Lightning carved the dark in jagged strokes. The aircraft rattled like it might come apart in midair. And she almost smiled. Because she knew something the rest of them didn't. Storms tested you, but they also hid you. And right now, hiding was survival. The pilot's voice came through, strained. 2 minutes to drop zone. 2 minutes, that was all. She looked down at her hands, steady despite the shaking world around her. She thought of her brother's photo, folded inside her folder back in the pack. She thought of the promise she'd made, not in words but in the silence that followed his absence. I'll carry what you couldn't. I'll fight where you never could. The storm screamed outside. The aircraft pushed forward, trembling. One man muttered, voice breaking, "We're not gonna make it." Another snapped back, "Shut up, we'll make it." She said nothing. But inside she whispered to herself, "We'll make it because I will." The floor jolted. The red light above the ramp flicked on. 1 minute. The men rose, shaky but determined, strapping gear, checking weapons. She rose too. The rifle case felt heavier now, not because of weight but because of meaning. 30 seconds. She stepped toward the ramp, the storm a living wall beyond it. Rain slashed into the cabin. Wind tore at her clothes. 20 seconds. Someone shouted at her, "You shouldn't be first." She didn't look back. 10 seconds. The ramp lowered further, thunder shaking the night. The storm swallowed everything. 5, 4, 3. She took one last breath. 2. And then she jumped. Into the storm. Into the silence that would either erase her or remember her forever. She was the storm's last whisper, fading, yet carrying the strength of eternity. What did it feel like to fall into nothing? The storm swallowed her whole, tearing sound from her ears, ripping the air from her lungs. For a moment there was no sky, no earth, no direction at all, only chaos. The wind clawed at her, twisting her body like a rag doll. Rain lashed her helmet, each drop a bullet of cold. But inside she was calm. Others feared storms. She had learned to listen to them, to feel their rhythm, to surrender to their violence until it carried her where she needed to go. Her altimeter blinked red. She yanked the cord. The chute exploded open, jerking her body with brutal force. For a second she thought it might tear free, shredded by the storm, but it held, thin fabric against the roar of the sky. Lightning cracked, white light flashed across her visor. The world revealed itself for a heartbeat, dark terrain below, ridgelands like teeth, forests writhing under the storm's fists. Then darkness again. She adjusted her straps, forced the chute to obey. Wind whipped her sideways hard, but she corrected. She'd done this before, too many times, always alone. Her boots hit the ground harder than she wanted. Knees buckled. Mud splashed. She rolled, pulled in the chute, cut the cords with practiced hands. The canopy whipped away, vanishing into the dark. Silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of danger. She crouched low, scanning, trees bent under the storm. Shadows shifted with the lightning. The mission zone, she had made it. But where were the others? She tapped her earpiece, static. She adjusted the dial, a faint voice broke through. Oppie, Team Bravo, do you? Then nothing but the storm again. She clenched her jaw. Alone, not unexpected. Storm jumps scattered teams like leaves. They would regroup if they could. She checked her weapon, chambered around, adjusted the strap. Her heartbeat steadied. She was here, alive. That was enough. For now. The forest swallowed her as she moved. Mud sucked at her boots. Branches clawed at her sleeves. Rain poured in sheets, thick enough to blur the world into smears of green and black. She moved with practiced silence, every step deliberate. Her breathing slow. Her eyes scanning not just for enemies but for movement, any movement that didn't belong. A flash of memory struck. Training exercises years ago when she was the only woman in a platoon of men. The sergeant's voice barking, "You're too loud. You'll never pass sniper school with those steps." She had smiled then, said nothing, and on the qualification range she had outshot every single one of them. Silence was her answer, precision her defiance. Now years later the storm was her ally. The rain masked her steps, the thunder cloaked her breath. Still something felt wrong. Not the storm, not the forest, something else. She stopped, tilted her head, listened. There a sound, small, quick, a crunch not made by the storm. Her rifle slid into her hands. She lowered to one knee, eyes narrowing into the dark. A shadow flickered between trees, too fast to catch detail, human height, human movement. She steadied her aim, finger on the trigger. The wind howled, shaking branches, slashing rain across her face. Lightning split the sky. And in that flash she saw him. A soldier, American, one of hers. But he wasn't moving like one. He stumbled, hand clutching his side, blood mixing with rain. His face pale, lips trembling. "Help," he gasped, collapsing into the mud. She sprinted forward, sliding into the muck beside him. Her hands pressed to his wound automatically, instinct overriding thought. Warm blood poured between her fingers. "Stay with me," she whispered, though she didn't even know his name. His eyes found hers, wide with panic. They were waiting, he breathed. Ambushed 2 clicks east, they knew. Her chest tightened. The mission was compromised already. "How many?" she asked. "Too many," he coughed, blood flecking his lips. His hand twitched, grasping at nothing. "Tell my wife." His eyes glazed before the words finished. The storm swallowed the last breath from his body. She sat back, the mud cold against her legs, blood on her hands. For a long moment she just stared at him, the storm raging around them. Another nameless body, another story that would never be told. She wiped her hands on the earth, smeared red into brown until only the rain remained. And then she whispered, so low only the storm could hear, "I'll carry it." She rose, checked her compass, adjusted her pack. East. If the enemy was waiting, then that was where she needed to go. The forest thickened, trees pressed close. The mud turned to slick roots and jagged rocks. Her breath misted in the cold, every exhale torn away by the wind. Twice she thought she saw movement. Once she nearly raised her rifle, but it was only a branch snapping in the gale. Another time she froze, heart racing, before realizing it was her own shadow cast by lightning. Still, she didn't let her guard down, not once. And all the while, the storm pulled her deeper. She thought of her brother again, the way he used to chase storms as a boy, running into the rain while she shouted after him. He had loved the chaos, the thrill of it. She had hated it then, feared he'd be struck by lightning, feared she'd lose him even before the war took him away for good. Now she was the one chasing storms. She wondered what he would think if he saw her like this, alone, carrying a rifle heavier than her body had once been, walking into danger not out of choice but out of debt. The thought tightened her chest, but she kept walking. Then she heard it again. Voices. Low, sharp, not English. She crouched instantly, body pressed to the wet earth, rifle angled through the trees. Shapes moved ahead, dark uniforms, rifles glinting when lightning cut the sky. Enemy patrol. 4 of them. She steadied her breathing, counted their steps. Their formation was loose, careless. They thought the storm shielded them. Her finger tightened on the trigger. She could take them. 1 shot, 2, 3, 4, quick, clean, silent. But her chest burned with hesitation. Not fear, something else. The soldier she just held, the one who died in her hands, his face flashed before her. His last words, they were waiting. Was this it, the edge of the ambush? If she fired, she would reveal herself, draw the rest. If she didn't, they might stumble on her anyway. Her hands tightened, her breath slowed. The storm gave her cover, but it also demanded choice. Lightning split the sky again. Her eyes locked on the lead soldier's face, young, no older than 20. Her heart twisted. Every enemy was someone's son, someone's brother. But hesitation in war was death. She pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked, the storm swallowed the sound. The first man dropped. Before the others even turned, she fired again. Then again. 3 bodies fell into mud. The 4th turned, shouting. Her last bullet caught him in the throat. Silence returned, thick and heavy. She exhaled slowly. The storm pressed closer, rain washing blood into the earth. 4 more lives erased, 4 more weights on her shoulders. She rose, scanning the trees, waiting for the ambush that didn't come. Not yet. But it would. She could feel it. And as she melted back into the storm's shadows, one thought carved itself into her mind. They know we're here, they've always known, someone told them. The forest stretched on. Each step carried her deeper. Each gust of wind reminded her that time was running thin. She didn't know if her team had survived the drop. She didn't know if anyone else was still moving toward the target. But she knew this. The mission was compromised, and she was already inside the heart of it. Her hand brushed against the photo folded inside her vest, her brother's smile, her promise. Whatever waited ahead, betrayal, ambush, death, she would not turn back. Because storms were not meant to be fled. They were meant to be walked through. And she was the storm's last whisper, still fatting but refusing to be silenced. How long could a secret stay buried before it clawed its way out? She pressed deeper into the storm, boots sinking into mud, rifle close against her shoulder. The forest closed in around her, branches whipping under the violent wind. Every crack of thunder felt like a reminder. Someone told them. Someone gave them the drop. She had seen too many coincidences to believe otherwise. Lightning slashed the sky. For a heartbeat, the world lit up, a broken path ahead, the glint of something metallic half buried in the ground. Then darkness again. She knelt, fingers brushed over the object, a shell casing, still warm. They were close. Her breath slowed. She adjusted her pack, checked her weapon again. The storm poured harder, sheets of rain flattening the world. Perfect cover and perfect trap. The mission on paper was simple. Too simple. Insert. Secure the ridge. Intercept the convoy rumored to be carrying weapons destined for cells that would carve the region apart. But nothing about tonight was simple anymore. The dead soldier's words echoed. They were waiting. She thought of his eyes, wide with fear, desperate to make her understand before the storm took his last breath. She carried his message now, and it burned in her chest. The others didn't know. If they were still alive, they were walking straight into the jaws of something designed to kill them all. And maybe, just maybe, someone in her own ranks wanted it that way. She stopped moving, leaned against a tree, rain running down her face. Who could it be? Not the colonel, he had too much to lose. Not the young mechanic, he didn't even know the real mission. Her eyes narrowed. Harper. The lieutenant who had stared at her in the briefing room, whose gaze hadn't been indifferent like the others but calculating. She remembered his face, recognition, judgment. They had crossed paths years ago briefly, and he had known something about her then, something she had buried. If betrayal had a face, it might look like his. But suspicion wasn't proof, and proof didn't matter right now. What mattered was surviving long enough to uncover the truth. She pushed off the tree, rifle angled forward, steps careful, deliberate. A sound cracked through the storm, not thunder, not rain. Gunfire. She dropped instantly, rolling into the mud, rifle up. The shots echoed from the east, close, too close. She crawled forward, every movement deliberate, heart steady. Lightning lit the forest again, just enough to reveal shapes ahead. Soldiers. Not enemy. Her team. Pinned down. She saw flashes of muzzle fire. The storm swallowed the noise, but the fight was real, brutal, desperate. Her men, though none of them had ever called her theirs, were crouched behind fallen logs, firing blindly into shadows. And the shadows fired back. She counted quickly, at least 6 enemy, maybe more, flanking, moving fast. Her team didn't see it. She exhaled, pressed her cheek against the rifle, lined up her first shot. Crack. 1 man down. She shifted, fired again. Another collapsed. The team startled, heads snapping toward the sound, toward her. But before they could question, she fired again, then again, thinning the enemy line. The ambush faltered. The remaining soldiers shouted to each other, panic rising. The storm drowned their words. Her team surged forward, seizing the break. They fired in rhythm now, pushing back. Within minutes the fight ended, bodies in the mud, the storm washing red into brown. And silence. She rose slowly, rifle steady. The team turned toward her. Recognition flickered, confusion followed, and then disbelief. One of them spat. It was Harper, his helmet tilted back, rain streaming down his scarred face. His eyes burned into hers. She said nothing, just stepped forward, lowering her rifle only slightly. You weren't even supposed to be on this op, Harper hissed. What the hell are you doing here? She met his stare, unblinking. Saving your lives. The others exchanged glances. Some nodded subtly, others frowned. One young soldier, face pale, whispered, "She just dropped 3 of them before I even saw them move." Harper ignored him. He stepped closer, his voice a knife. "I don't care what ghost pulled your strings. You're not part of this unit." Her jaw tightened. "Neither are you if you can't see we're already compromised." That silenced them. The storm howled, filling the gap. Lightning lit Harper's face, sharp and twisted. He wanted to argue, wanted to bury her in silence again. But the dead soldier's words still echoed in her mind. They knew. She scanned their faces. Mud, blood, exhaustion, but behind their eyes more than fear, suspicion, fractures already forming. Harper broke the silence first. "We move to the ridge, stick to the plan. If you're coming, fine, but stay out of my way." She let him walk past, the others following. She stayed still for a moment longer. The storm pounded her helmet, slid down her cheeks like tears. Something in Harper's voice had confirmed what she already feared. He wasn't just skeptical of her. He was hiding something. And she would find out what. The climb to the ridge was brutal. Mud slicked the incline, rocks cut through boots, rain blinded eyes. Men slipped, cursed, dragged themselves back up. She climbed in silence, her breaths even, her focus unshaken. One soldier, barely older than 20, slid beside her. His face was gaunt, eyes hollowed by fear. "You were sniper qualified, right?" he whispered, voice almost lost in the storm. She glanced at him, once. He nodded, swallowed hard. "I heard stories about you, didn't think you were real." She didn't answer. He kept talking, maybe just to keep himself sane. "Back home, my mom, she used to say storms were God's way of reminding us we're small, that we can't control everything." Guess she was right. For the first time all night, a faint smile touched her lips. Not amusement, something softer, sadder. She was right, but storms also remind us we're still here. The young soldier nodded, eyes glassy. His breath shook, but he steadied it, matching hers. For a moment she wasn't invisible. For a moment she was human. Then Harper's voice cut through the storm. "Eyes up, we're close." The moment broke. They reached the ridge as dawn bled into the storm, faint gray light straining against the clouds. The convoy below moved like a dark snake through the valley, headlights cutting dim lines through the rain. It was real. The target. But something about it twisted her gut. Too exposed, too deliberate. A convoy moving through a storm this brutal. No, it was bait. She crouched, peering through her scope. Trucks, armored, soldiers walking alongside, too neat, too staged. Her pulse slowed, every instinct screamed. Harper whispered beside her, "We hit them now." She shook her head, "It's a trap." He sneered, "Of course you'd say that." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley. For that brief second she saw it. Movement in the tree line, dozens of shadows, hidden positions. The convoy wasn't alone. She exhaled slowly. "They're waiting for us." The young soldier beside her whispered, "God." Harper tightened his grip on his rifle. "Orders are orders." She turned her head, met his eyes. "If you fire, we're all dead." The storm howled. Thunder shook the ground. The valley below shifted like a trap snapping shut. And in that suspended silence, every life on the ridge balanced on one choice: obey Harper's blind command or trust her unseen truth. The storm pressed heavier, rain blinding, lightning cracking the world open. Her finger brushed the trigger, her breath slowed. She wasn't sure if she was aiming at the convoy or at Harper. But she knew this: one wrong shot and eternity would claim them all. She was the storm's last whisper, and whispers, when ignored, became screams. They say a soldier's silence is louder than thunder. On that ridge, as dawn strained against the storm, silence screamed in every heart. The convoy below moved like a serpent through the valley, trucks grinding through mud, headlights cutting fractured beams through sheets of rain. Soldiers flanked them in rigid formation, too neat, too rehearsed. It was a stage, and they were the audience. She pressed her cheek against her scope, her breath steady despite the storm clawing at her face. Her finger brushed the trigger, but her rifle wasn't aimed at the convoy. It was aimed at Harper. One wrong move from him, and the entire ridge would drown in fire. "Target in sight," Harper muttered into his mic. His voice was low, measured, but it carried the arrogance of command. "Prepare to engage." Her gut twisted. He couldn't see it, or he refused to. She whispered, calm, deliberate, "It's bait." No one answered. The team shifted nervously, mud slipping under their boots as they adjusted positions. Rifles rose, fingers twitched. She repeated, sharper this time, "Hold fire, it's a trap." Harper's head snapped toward her, rain streaking down his scarred face. His eyes burned. "You don't give orders here." She met his glare, unflinching. "You pull that trigger, you won't live long enough to regret it." A beat of silence, the storm howled. And then, too fast to stop, Harper's rifle cracked. The first bullet streaked into the valley. It slammed into the lead truck's windshield. Glass shattered. The vehicle swerved, screeching to a halt. Chaos erupted. In the trees flanking the convoy, dozens of muzzle flashes exploded in unison. Machine guns, mortars, even RPGs. The valley lit up like a furnace. "Contact, contact," the team shouted, voices breaking through the storm. Bullets screamed up the ridge, tearing through earth, stone, and flesh. Men dove for cover, mud exploding around them. One soldier screamed as his shoulder ripped open, blood spraying against the rain. She dropped instantly, rolling behind a rock, scope swinging. Too late, the jaws already closed. Her rifle cracked. An enemy soldier in the tree line collapsed. Crack again, another fell. But for everyone she dropped, 3 more surged forward. "Ambush," someone bellowed. "No shit," another screamed, voice shredded by panic. The ridge became a slaughterhouse. She moved like a shadow through mud and chaos, every breath measured, every shot deliberate. A sniper wasn't built for brawls like this, but tonight she didn't have a choice. A young soldier, the same one who had whispered to her on the climb, slid beside her, eyes wide with terror. His hands shook around his rifle. "What do we do?" he gasped, his voice breaking. She steadied him with a glance. "Breathe, aim, fire only when you see them." He nodded, swallowing hard. He raised his weapon, breath ragged. The first shot missed. The second didn't. She almost smiled, almost. Then mortar fire slammed into the ridge. The ground convulsed. Rocks shattered. Soldiers were hurled screaming into the air. Mud and blood mixed, raining down in thick clumps. The young soldier cried out, clutching his ears, dazed. She grabbed his vest, dragged him into cover just before another shell chewed into the earth where he had been. Harper's voice roared through the chaos. "Suppressive fire, hold the line." But there was no line left, only fragments. She swung her rifle back to the valley. Through smoke and storm she saw them, enemy soldiers pouring out of the tree line, advancing in waves, coordinated, precise. This wasn't desperation, this was design. Her suspicions hardened into truth. Someone had told them. Someone had fed the enemy their timing, their path, their ridge. And Harper, whether blind or complicit, was leading them into the teeth of it. "Fall back," she shouted, voice cutting through the storm. "We can't hold this." Harper spun on her, face twisted with rage. "We hold or we die." She stepped toward him, rain running like fire down her cheeks. "We stay, we all die. You want to sacrifice them because of your pride. Fine, but I'm not watching these men get fed to wolves." For a heartbeat their eyes locked, command against defiance, arrogance against clarity. Another mortar hit, blasting them apart. When the smoke cleared, 3 more men were down. One screamed, leg mangled beyond saving. Another lay still, eyes glassy, rain washing over his face. And Harper, he wasn't looking at them. He was still aiming at the valley. Blind or guilty? She couldn't tell which. Her decision snapped into place. She grabbed the radio from the mud, voice hard, unshaken. "All units fall back to secondary ridge. Move now." The young soldier stared at her, then at Harper. His breath shook. His choice hung heavy. Then he moved. He grabbed his wounded comrade, slung him over his shoulder, and stumbled into the storm. The others hesitated, caught between chains of command and the instinct to survive. One by one they chose her. Not Harper. Her. The retreat was chaos. Bullets chased them through mud and stone, ripping trees apart, chewing the ridge into splinters. Men screamed, fell, bled into the earth. She fired as they moved, every shot slowing the enemy, every second bought with thunder and steel. The young soldier stumbled, almost fell. She caught him, pushed him forward. "Don't stop." The ridge behind them burned. Flames and smoke swallowed the bodies left behind. The storm raged above, but the fire below was hotter, hungrier. By the time they staggered into the secondary ridge, half broken, half dead, they were no longer soldiers. They were survivors. And survivors needed truth. They collapsed into mud and stone, lungs heaving, hands trembling. The storm still raged, but here, in the broken shelter of rock and tree, there was a heartbeat of safety. She scanned their faces. The young soldier, the mechanic, two others bloodied, shaken. And Harper, his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Hatred, fear, maybe guilt. He stepped toward her, voice low, venomous. "You undermined command." She met his gaze, steady, cold. "I saved them." He sneered. "You think that makes you one of us? You're a ghost, a shadow that doesn't exist. You're nothing." The young soldier's voice cracked, raw, furious. "She's the reason we're still breathing." Harper's jaw tightened. His hand flexed near his rifle. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd draw on her right then. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he spat into the mud, turned away. "You just painted a target on your back." She didn't flinch. Because in the chaos of the storm, in the blood and betrayal, she had seen something clearer than any scope. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a hunt. And the traitor wasn't done. The survivors huddled in silence as the storm pressed heavier, lightning splitting the sky into shards. The valley below burned, enemy soldiers sweeping through wreckage like vultures. She wiped rain from her eyes, mud from her rifle. Her thoughts burned sharper than ever. Someone wanted them dead. Someone wanted her buried in silence again, but not this time. She would uncover the truth, drag it into the light, even if she had to bleed the storm dry to do it. For the first time that night, she whispered, not to her team, not to Harper, but to herself. They'll remember, whether they want to or not. And in the roar of the storm, the whisper carried like a vow. Why did survival always feel heavier than death? The storm had moved past them, leaving behind only dripping trees and the sharp smell of burned earth. The survivors crouched in silence under the jagged rocks of the secondary ridge. Their breaths came ragged, steam rising in the cold. The rain had thinned, but mud clung to everything, boots, rifles, even their eyes. She knelt in the dirt, pressing a bandage against the mechanic's arm. His sleeve was shredded, flesh torn, blood running hot over her fingers. His jaw clenched as he bit back a scream. "You'll live," she murmured, steady, though inside she felt the tremor of doubt. He forced a grin that looked nothing like one. "That's good news." Her hands didn't stop moving, didn't falter, but her heart heard more than his words, the fear beneath them, the unspoken question, how long will we live? The young soldier, his face pale but his eyes fierce, sat against a rock, his rifle resting across his lap. He watched her work with something like reverence, but also desperation. He needed her to be unshakable, needed her to be more than she was. "Why didn't they listen to you?" he asked suddenly, his voice cracked. She looked up at him, then down again at the wound beneath her hands. "Because silence is easier to dismiss than truth." He frowned, "But you were right." Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. The truth was more bitter than that. Harper's shadow loomed a few feet away, his rifle slung, his face hidden in the dark. He hadn't spoken since they staggered into this hollow, but his silence was venom. She could feel his gaze, sharp, cutting into her even when he looked away. The wounded man groaned. She tied off the bandage, her hands stained red. For a moment she let herself pause. The smell of blood, rain, and smoke clung thick to the air. She breathed it in, let it burn her lungs. Her brother's face flickered again in memory, his laughter, his broken silence, the night he disappeared from her world. She pressed her eyes shut, just for a second, then opened them again. Focus, the living needed her now. She stood, scanning the ridge. The valley below was still crawling with enemy soldiers, sweeping wreckage for survivors. Occasionally, Tracer rounds lit the darkness, sharp green lines stitching across black air. "We won't last here," she said, voice flat. "They'll sweep up this ridge next." No one moved, no one spoke. Finally the young soldier asked, "Then where do we go?" She answered without hesitation. "North, higher ground. There's a cave system near the cliffs. We can regroup there." Harper's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "No." She turned. His face was hard, jaw clenched, eyes narrow with fury. "You don't get to decide that." Her pulse slowed, steadied. "You want to wait here, wait to die, be my guest." He stepped forward, boots squelching in the mud. "You think you saved them back there. You led them into chaos. You cost us half the unit." Her eyes met his, unblinking. "No, you did." The words landed like gunfire. The young soldier rose halfway, his voice trembling but firm. "She's right. If we'd stayed, if we'd followed you, we'd all be dead." Harper spun on him, fury blazing. "You're just a kid. You don't know what the hell you're talking about." The soldier flinched, but held his ground. His knuckles whitened around his rifle. And she watched Harper's rage, and beneath it something else. Not just arrogance, not just pride, something darker. Fear. She broke the silence before it swallowed them. "We move north, at first light." Harper's laugh was sharp, humorless. "And if I refuse?" She didn't hesitate. "Then you won't be moving at all." A gasp broke from the mechanic. The others froze. The storm had passed, but another storm lived here now, in the mud, in the space between her and Harper. For a long moment he just stared. His eyes flickered, calculating. Then slowly he turned away. "Do what you want, but when command hears about this insubordination, you'll be finished." She let him walk into the shadows, because she knew deep in her bones that command already knew. They knew about the trap. They knew about the ridge. They knew about her silence. This wasn't failure, it was design. And Harper was part of it. Night bled slow across the ridge. The storm finally drifted into the distance, leaving the air sharp with cold. The survivors huddled close, their shoulders touching, rifles in hand. Sleep came in broken fragments, stolen minutes between jolts of fear. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the edge of the ridge, her rifle across her knees, her eyes scanning the dark. The rain had stopped, but water dripped from leaves in a steady rhythm. The silence pressed deep, thick with unspoken things. The young soldier moved beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just sat, breathing quietly, his face pale in the moonlight. Finally he asked, "Why do you keep fighting?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Because if I stop," she whispered at last, "then everything I lost stays lost, and nothing I've done matters." His throat tightened. He looked down at his hands. "I lost my brother too. He wasn't a soldier. He just never came home one night. Wrong place, wrong people. They said it was nothing, that it happens. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me." Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to share that. Hadn't expected the quiet bond of grief to draw them close, even in the mud, even in the silence of war. For the first time that night she looked at him fully, and in his eyes she saw not a boy but a reflection of her own past, raw, unfinished, scarred. "You'll carry him," she said softly, "for the rest of your life, but carrying isn't the same as being crushed." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Is that what you're doing?" She almost smiled, almost trying. The night stretched thin, shadows shifted, distant gunfire echoed through the valley like ghosts. And she knew sleep would never come. Not for her, not anymore. Because the real battle hadn't even begun. The ambush was only the opening move. The real question, the one gnawing in her chest, wasn't why, it was who. Who had set them up, who wanted her erased from the storm's memory. Her gaze drifted toward Harper, who sat alone, his back to the others, his face hidden in the dark. His silence was louder than gunfire. She didn't trust him, not with the wounded, Not with the living, not with the truth. And she knew sooner or later that silence would break. But when it did, it would tear them all apart. She closed her eyes, let the night press against her skin, let the whispers of memory rise again. Her brother's laughter, his silence, his absence. Her own vow, if I can't save the past, I'll save what's left of the present. And in that vow, she found her center again. The storm wasn't gone, it had just shifted. And she, whether they liked it or not, was the storm's last whisper. Fading, but carrying the strength of eternity. What made silence heavier underground than on the battlefield? Maybe it was the way the cave swallowed every breath, every shuffle of boots, every whisper of fear. Maybe it was because in the dark no one could hide what they carried. Not anger, not grief, not betrayal. The survivors moved like shadows through the jagged stone passage, their rifles clutched tight, their footsteps muffled in mud. The air was cold, damp, filled with the slow drip of unseen water. Every echo stretched as though the cave wanted to hold their secrets forever. She walked at the front, her rifle raised, her eyes flicking across the narrow beam of her light. Behind her, the young soldier trudged close, his face pale in the glow. The mechanic stumbled, groaning, but forced himself forward. The others followed, weighed down by silence. And Harper, he stayed at the rear, his presence like a shadow pressing against them all. "Why here?" the young soldier whispered, his voice cracked in the cold. She kept moving. Because caves remember things the world forgets. If command is watching, they won't see us here. He frowned. "What do you mean, watching?" She didn't answer, not yet. The cave twisted, narrowing, then widening into a hollow chamber. The group collapsed against the stone, dropping packs, their shoulders sagging. The mechanic slumped with a groan, clutching his arm. Blood had soaked through the bandage again. She crouched beside him, pulled fresh gauze from her kit and worked quietly. The smell of copper filled the chamber. Her hands moved steady, but her mind was far from steady. The ambush, the ridge, Harper's arrogance, the way command had stayed silent. It was all too precise, too clean. The storm might have been chance, but the trap, no, someone had placed them there, someone wanted them broken. Her fingers tightened around the bandage. And maybe someone still did. Harper's voice cut through the dark, low, cold. "How long do you think you can keep playing leader?" She didn't look at him, long enough to keep them alive. He stepped forward, boots crunching against gravel. "You think these kids will follow you forever? They're scared. They need strength, not whispers. You're not strong, you're just stubborn." Her head lifted slowly, her eyes locked onto his. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "stubborn is the only strength left." A silence stretched, taut as wire. The others shifted uncomfortably. The young soldier bristled, his fists clenched but didn't speak. Harper sneered. "You've already poisoned them against me. Don't think I don't see it." "You did that yourself." His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat she thought he'd draw his weapon right there. But instead he turned, spat into the dirt and sank into the shadows. The cave seemed to grow colder. Later, when the others dozed in uneasy fragments of sleep, she sat awake at the chamber's edge, her rifle across her knees. The drip of water echoed. The dark pressed heavy. The young soldier stirred beside her, his eyes glinting in the faint glow of her light. "You don't sleep," he murmured. She shook her head. "Not anymore." He hesitated, then asked, "You think Harper's the reason we walked into that ambush?" Her pulse slowed. She hadn't spoken it aloud, not yet. "Yes," she whispered, "or he's protecting whoever is." The young soldier's face tightened, his throat bobbed. "Then why not tell the others?" She exhaled slowly. "Because if I say it without proof, it'll break us apart faster than bullets, and broken men don't survive storms." His silence said more than words. Finally he whispered, "Then how do we survive?" Her gaze hardened. "We wait, we watch, And when the truth shows itself, we don't look away. Hours bled together. The cave swallowed time. At one point, the mechanic muttered fevered words in his sleep, shaking with pain. She pressed a hand against his brow, steadying him, whispering nothing but presence. The young soldier handed her his canteen, eyes heavy with worry. Little things kept them human, small kindnesses carved from stone. But Harper, he stayed silent, his eyes always on her, his face shadowed. She could feel him circling, waiting like a wolf watching for weakness. When they moved again, the cave narrowed into a steep descent. The floor slick with moss, the walls close enough to scrape shoulders. Their breaths grew louder. Their lights flicked across jagged stone. The mechanic stumbled, nearly falling. She caught him, bracing his weight. Harper didn't move to help. At the bottom, the passage widened into another chamber, this one marked by an underground pool. The water was still, black as glass. Their reflections wavered faintly in the glow of their lights. The young soldier knelt to fill his canteen. She stopped him with a hand. "Not here." "Why?" "Still water doesn't feed, it takes." He frowned, confused, but obeyed. Harper snorted. Superstitions now. What's next? Omens in the rain. She turned slowly. "You'd be surprised what storms can tell you if you listen." Their gazes clashed again, and again the silence burned. That night, when the others drifted into restless sleep, Harper made his move. She felt it before she saw it, the shift of air, the subtle scrape of boots. She turned, and there he was, crouched by her pack, his hands rifling through it. Her voice cut sharp in the dark, looking for something. He froze, then straightened slowly, a knife glinting in his hand. His smile was cold, humorless. "Proof," he said softly, "the kind you think you have." She rose, rifle in hand, her stance calm, steady. "And what would you do with proof?" His eyes glimmered. "Bury it like they'll bury you." The young soldier stirred, blinking awake, his eyes widening at the sight of the blade. "What the hell are you doing?" Harper's voice dropped lower, venom in every word. "Saving us from her lies before she gets us all killed." She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her finger rested against the trigger, steady as her breath. The chamber was a heartbeat away from violence. And in that heartbeat, the mechanic groaned, shifting against the wall, his pain breaking the silence. It was enough. Enough for Harper to step back, enough for the young soldier to move between them. But the knife never lowered. The tension didn't break, it only sank deeper. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Harper. Their silence was no longer the same storm. It was the warning before lightning. And everyone else could feel it. By morning, if morning could even be felt underground, they moved again. The cave's passage twisted upward, a narrow climb toward faint light. Their breaths rasped in the thin air, their bodies weary, their will stretched thin. The young soldier climbed close beside her, whispering when Harper couldn't hear. "If he tries again." She cut him off. "He will, the question is if, it's when." And her voice carried the weight of something darker, not fear, resolve. Because she knew Harper wasn't the only enemy left in these caves. There was another, the one outside, the one who had placed them in the storm's jaws. And she intended to face them both, no matter how deep she had to go. At last the passage broke open into daylight. The survivors staggered into a clearing high on the cliffs, the storm now distant on the horizon. The air was sharp, clean, filled with the smell of pine and stone. For a moment they breathed easier. But she knew better. This wasn't safety. This was the eye of the storm. And storms never forgot. She stood at the cliff's edge, the wind tearing through her hair, the world stretching vast and broken below. The valley burned with the memory of ambush, smoke still curling into the sky. Her heart burned with it. And she whispered again, to herself, to the storm, to the silence that carried her brother's face. "They'll remember, even if I have to carve it into stone." Behind her, Harper's eyes still burned. And she knew the next move was his. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? The compound was quiet now, too quiet. Dusk clung to the night air, lit faintly by the dying flames of a half-collapsed building. She crouched in the ruins, her rifle pressed against her shoulder, eyes scanning through the cracked scope. The mission wasn't over. Not yet. But the battlefield had gone still, and in stillness came the most dangerous kind of fear, the kind that whispered instead of roared. Alina could feel her heart beating in her ears, too loud for her liking. She slowed her breath, counted the seconds. Shadows shifted beyond the smoke, but nothing moved with intent. She waited. Patience was survival. And yet beneath that discipline, another pulse throbbed, something rawer, older. The memory of her brother's face the night he never came home. She hadn't known it then, but this silence was the same kind. Vasquez. A voice crackled in her earpiece, almost startling her. Hayes, calm but strained. Status. She whispered back. Perimeter quiet, no visual. She hesitated. Then softer, too quiet. There was a pause that told her he felt it too. The SEAL team was regrouping 2 streets away, patching up what remained of their strength. She'd seen the toll with her own eyes, Corporal Jensen bleeding through a tourniquet, Alvarez limping, stubborn, refusing evacuation. Men who'd carried themselves with unshakable bravado now spoke in broken fragments. But they were still alive. Alive because she had covered their retreat when the ambush broke the night open. Still, survival was not victory. Their objective, a prisoner whose knowledge could stop the next wave of attacks, was still unaccounted for. And the longer the silence stretched, the more Alina knew the enemy wasn't finished. They were waiting, coiling, preparing to strike again. She slid lower, pressed her cheek to the cracked concrete. Through the sight she caught a flicker movement in a window, not a fighter's jerky discipline. Softer, slower, a child. No, a woman, civilians. She blinked hard. The mission brief had been clear. The block was cleared hours ago. Yet here they were, shadows of life where only death was supposed to remain. Her throat tightened. How many times had she been told, by instructors, commanders, even her own conscience, not to look too close, not to humanize what might become collateral? But the image stayed. The woman clutching a child, frozen in fear as soldiers moved below her home. Alina, Hayes again, sharper this time, eyes on anything. She should have said no, should have kept the report clean. Instead, civilians, 2nd floor northeast building. Static, then a sigh. Copy, stay on them, we'll adjust. But she knew what adjust meant. It meant someone would make a decision far away from here, with less weight in their chest and more distance from the faces behind the glass. Alina shifted, following the woman's trembling form through the scope. Her finger hovered near the trigger, not for them but for whatever came hunting them, because something would. It always did. Minutes passed, minutes that felt like hours. Then it came, the faint metallic rattle of a rifle bolt from the opposite roof. She swung her scope fast, found the glint. A sniper, trained, patient, and aimed not at her, not at the SEALs, but directly into that window where the woman and child hid. Her gut clenched, a trap within a trap, civilians used as bait. She knew the math. They wanted her to hesitate, to flinch, to reveal her position. But she couldn't do nothing, not again. She exhaled, long and steady, and squeezed. The crack of her rifle split the silence. The enemy sniper jerked back, glass exploding around him. Silence returned, heavier than before. Her comm hissed alive. Hayes low shot. Sniper rooftop neutralized, she swallowed. They were targeting the civilians. The pause stretched longer this time, then quietly, understood. For the first time that night, Alina felt her hands tremble. She forced them still, pressed them harder into the stock of her rifle. The silence pressed in again, but it wasn't empty. It was listening, watching. Behind her, distant footsteps crunched closer. She didn't turn, didn't lower her weapon. But the voice that followed made her shoulders ease just slightly. Hayes again, closer now, almost gentle. You held the line. She wanted to believe that, wanted to let his words stitch over the raw ache inside, but all she could think of was how fragile the line truly was. A single hesitation, a single distraction, and everything could unravel. Still, she nodded once sharp as if to herself, not done yet. Because there was something she hadn't told them, not yet, something about why she was really here, why every breath felt like borrowed time. The storm wasn't over, it was only gathering. What was the sound she heard at the very end, wind or a whisper? The compound had fallen behind them, a ruin of smoke and memory. The seals moved through the dawn light, broken but alive, their boots dragging in the dust. Elena followed, steps steady, though every muscle in her body begged to collapse. She carried the weight silently, her pack, her rifle, her thoughts. The prisoner they had pulled from the dark was limping between two operators, head low, barely speaking. His presence meant the mission was technically complete. Intelligence secured. A future attack delayed. On paper, this was survival. On paper, this was success. But papers did not bleed. They did not echo with screams. They did not carry the faces of the ones who hadn't made it out. Elena kept her eyes on the horizon, the gray dawn rising slow, its silence too wide to fill. Hayes walked at her side, his voice quieter than usual, as if the weight of the night had pressed even him into reflection. "They'll call this one a win," he muttered. "That's what command does. Wrap it up in the right words. Send it home clean." She didn't answer. Words felt brittle now. Instead, she thought of Alvarez, carried out with a makeshift crutch, of Jensen, refusing morphine until the others were safe, of the woman and child she'd seen through her scope, still alive because she had broken the silence. Tiny lights in a night that wanted to swallow everything whole. Hayes slowed, glanced at her. "You all right?" She almost laughed at the question. What did all right mean? She was standing, breathing, still moving forward, but inside the silence of the storm roared on. She gave him the smallest nod, nothing more. The convoy that would extract them waited beyond the ridge. The sound of distant rotors grew louder, beating against the dawn. Relief should have filled her chest. Instead, she felt an ache deeper than exhaustion, something closer to surrender. She wasn't sure if she belonged on that helicopter, not because she had failed, but because she had given everything she had and still, it didn't feel like enough. As the others trudged ahead, she slowed her pace, just for a moment, let the air catch her. The wind carried the faint scent of burned stone and dust. She closed her eyes, and in that fragile pause she thought she heard him, her brother's voice, the one she had chased into every mission since. Not words, just presence. A reminder. "You kept going." When she opened her eyes again, Hayes was watching her. He didn't ask, didn't press. He just gave a slow, steady nod, the kind a commander gave to someone he understood without needing explanation. No rank, no salute, just human recognition, quiet and unspoken. The helicopter thundered closer. The team boarded, one by one. Elena climbed last, turning once to look at the broken city. The smoke curled like fatting breath against the pale morning sky. She thought of the title someone might give her story, one day, if they cared enough to write it down. She thought of the line she had been walking all along, between survival and sacrifice, silence and storm. As the doors shut and the noise drowned the silence, she sat with her rifle across her lap, her head leaning back against the metal wall. Eyes open, not asleep, not at rest. Because storms don't rest. They fade, yes, they soften, but even fading they carry strength in every whisper. The world outside blurred into distance. No words spoken, just silence, heavy, eternal. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when Elena Vasquez finally let the silence take her, it wasn't defeat. It was the storm's last whisper, fading, yet carrying the strength of eternity.